Hi everyone, welcome back to our second module, the RCM Level 9 History course. Today we're going to be taking a look at sonata form. So last time we talked about classicism, the Viennese school, and absolute music, and that was in our classical era module. Today we're going to be looking at some terms and concepts that are specifically related to this thing called sonata form. So we're going to be looking at, sonata form, exposition, development, recapitulation, coda, and sonata cycle. So let's start at the end there. A sonata cycle is a multi-movement structure that emerged in the classical era. This form is demonstrated in the symphony, sonata, or concerto genres. Sonata form is typically used as the first movement of a sonata cycle. So like we just said here, it's this multi-movement piece consisting of a first movement in sonata form, typically a slow second movement, then we get a minuet or scherzo as a third movement, and a faster fourth movement, which is often rondo form, occasionally in sonata form. There's more subtleties to be discussed regarding sonata cycles, but it's not too relevant for us at this point. Okay, so what is sonata form? It's also known as sonata allegro form. And it's this form which provides this formalized structure often used by composers in the first movement of a sonata cycle. It consists of an exposition. So we get a statement of two or more contrasting themes, a development, so a departure from those themes, and then a recapitulation, a return to those themes. Like we said earlier about sonata cycles, the sonata form isn't just used in sonatas, despite the name. We also see it in concertos and symphonies as well. So sonata form really evolved from what's called rounded binary form. So like you can see on your screen here, we have section A followed by section B. And then we have that little plus sign because section B attaches to this modified, shortened section A. So section A1. Now underneath, I've sort of outlined here the general harmonies of these sections. In section A, you're working in the tonic key. So for example, say you're in C major, well, your tonic key will be C major, right? So you go through section A, and just at the end of it, we transition, we modulate into the dominant key, G major. Section B operates within G major. So the dominant key of this entire thing now becomes the tonic key of section B. And then when we come back, when we return to this modified section A, we go back to the original tonic key, so back to C major. I just want to point out that this is really just, it's a rough guideline. It's a structure for composers to work within. So, for example, these one chords, or these tonic harmonies that we see, are going to really ground what a composer operates in. So, in other words, you can't start in something other than a tonic key. The key that you start in becomes a tonic key. So that's basically set in stone. And because section A and section A1 are tethered together, section A1 just being a modified version of section A, well, we know we have a return back to that tonic key. But, you might see some variation within section B. Theoretically, it's not outside of the realm of possibility for the composer to go, I just don't want it to be in the dominant key. Maybe they modulate somewhere else. But this is the most standard because 1 and 5 are the main pillars of harmony. It's tension and release. These are the two things that sort of hold harmony together. You can tell where you are in a scale based upon 1 and 5. But like I said, there's room for variation in which harmonies composers go to. And this leads us into sonata form. And we've got this, what might seem to be a moderately complicated outline of basic sonata form on the screen. But let's parse it out together. So, just in case it's not entirely clear, on the top, we have, in these blue boxes, we have these generalized sections of sonata form. And then we have this next layer of gray boxes, which is these smaller segments within the larger categories of exposition, development, and recapitulation. Then under that, we have the harmonies that we're primarily working with. So let's start on the far left. We have this introduction bit here. And an intro isn't a necessary part of sonata form, but you'll often see it crop up, especially in early uses of this form. It's typically quite slow, and it doesn't usually really have much of a thematic connection to the rest of the material in the sonata cycle. The intro, when it exists, is in the tonic major or minor of the tonic key of the movement. So if the rest of the movement is in A major, the intro is going to either be in A major or A minor. Maybe a better way to express this is that whatever the intro key is, the rest of the movement is going to be based in the tonic major or minor of that intro key. So if the intro is in A major or A minor, well then the exposition is going to start off in either A major or A minor. I think this is just, it's an important point to touch upon, that we're talking about tonic majors and minors here, tonic keys, rather than relative keys. So if the intro is in C major, the rest of the movement might be in C major or C minor. It wouldn't be C major or A minor. The intro is really just here to draw listeners in before launching into the meat of the movement. And actually, and I kind of tried to demonstrate this. Maybe it's a bit poorly done in the chart. While the entire exposition often ends up being repeated, the intro isn't typically part of that repeat. So it really is this, and this is why I have a line right after intro, because it's its own section which sort of operates by itself. It doesn't even get a blue box above it, because it's nothing more than this little segment which you can sort of toss away. It's just really there to captivate the attention of the audience. So let's shift focus a bit to exposition. The exposition is the first main section in sonata form. Two contrasting themes are stated within this section. We first get the first theme, which is going to be in the tonic key, and the second theme or themes are in a contrasting key, which is generally the dominant or relative minor of the tonic key. Now, they say, they have this line in the RCM thing here, and the second theme or themes. Really, realistically, it's going to be two themes. You're going to have one theme in the tonic key, second theme in a contrasting key. That's it. Okay, so that's exposition in general, but what about all these little bits and pieces in gray beneath it? Well, let's look at theme 1. Theme 1 is going to be in our tonic key, whether that's in major or minor. For ease of reference, I've made this chart to be dealing with a major tonic key, but sonata form isn't bound to exist only in a major key. So our tonic key is either in major or minor. This first theme is really setting the tone for the whole movement. It's going to have a distinctive melodic and rhythmic character. And then we hit the bridge. The bridge is going to be starting our modulation to a new key. It's going to start our movement towards theme 2. As such, we're probably going to be seeing lots of scale type and chordal passages to make that key transformation be as seamless as possible. Okay, then we come upon theme 2. Theme 2 is very often the dominant of our tonic key. However, this isn't always the case. Like we were talking about before with rounded binary keys, sometimes we might be seeing movement to the relative minor, or if the tonic key is in minor, we might be moving to the relative major. What matters is that we've moved away from the key the first theme established as the tonic. And just as we moved away tonally from the tonic, we're also moved away melodically. The second theme is typically contrasted in character, again both rhythmically and melodically, from the first theme. Now the RCM, and they're not alone in this, sometimes call this second theme area a theme group, because there might be a bunch of little melodic passages weaving in and out in this area of the exposition. I gotta say, I'm not a fan of this term, and because I think we typically do see one overarching second theme. Especially at this stage of sonata form development. We're not talking about the late romantics here. We're talking about like early classical sonata form. But I guess the point is that some people are uncomfortable with saying that there's just one theme when you might see some fragmented stuff showing up every now and again. So just don't be thrown off if you see the term theme group. Then we come to a little passage which wraps up the exposition in the new key. The RCM calls it a cadetta, but it might be called the closing theme or closing section. Basically, it's this cadential passage which brings the exposition to a close. I gotta say, I don't really agree that every exposition ends in a cadetta. You can just have a standard 5-1 cadence or something like that. But for the purposes of this exam, give them a cadetta. Now, the exposition as a whole is typically repeated once, minus that intro that we talked about. Then we move on to the developments. Let's take a look at that. The development is the second main section in sonata form. In this section, themes from the exposition are manipulated through fragmentation, sequential treatment, or changes to orchestration. New themes might also be introduced, along with modulations and increased harmonic tension. That's a mouthful. I feel kind of bad because I feel like I'm sort of disagreeing with the status quo a lot in this video. But I really don't like this definition. It's too wordy. It might technically be kind of right, but it's just too much. A development is fundamentally where the composer messes around with the themes from the exposition. That's it. It's not complicated. There's not much more to talk about with the development here. Early classical developments, they're pretty short, but by the time we're at the end of the Romantic era, the development is where the bulk of the movement happens. I think that this is actually a very good demonstration of how, even though it seems like there's all these strict formal rules for the structure of a first movement, they're actually pretty flexible. And despite all of these boxes I have on the screen, this structure allows for a lot of flexibility. Say with exposition, you can have an intro or you don't have to. Your first theme is in one key and the second is in another. Then you have a cadential thing in the new key. Then you have a development where the themes are messed about with by the composer. And in classical era concertos, a cadenza will show up at the end of the recap. But in the Romantic era, it starts getting moved earlier. There's just so much room for composers to adjust the form to what they want. It's actually kind of fantastic. Anyways, the development typically finishes off with this thing called dominant preparation, which just means that the composer is really emphasizing dominant harmony as we move into the recapitulation, which, as you can see on the screen, is back in our tonic key. So this dominant harmony in the dominant preparation isn't just random dominant harmony, like say 5 of 2, or 7 diminished 7 of 4, or anything like that. What we're really talking about is dominant harmony of the one chord of the tonic key. So think of 5 of our tonic, or 7 diminished 7 of our tonic. And then we hit the recapitulation, or recap. The recapitulation is the third main section, and it's the final main section in sonata form, in which the first and second themes, introduced previously in the exposition and then worked upon, developed in the development, are both restated, but in the tonic key. Okay, pretty simple. We get the exposition again, but we just don't move away from our tonic harmony. We sometimes end off the recap, however, with a coda. Latin for tail, or CODA. Coda is a concluding section, sometimes used at the end of a recap, which reaffirms the tonic key. Now, coda isn't a totally standard part of sonata form. Like, you don't see it in every single instance of sonata form, but it's not unusual either. It really just pounds out the tonic key one last time. So you might see a lot of repeated cadences, like 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, over and over and over and over. Tension release, just laying it out there. Sometimes you might get some new material, but again, that's not totally necessary. It's not entirely standard. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. I realize this has been a long video, but this has been a very important topic for us to cover in at least some degree of depth as we move into the rest of this module 2, where we're dealing with these big three of the Viennese school who really helped develop this sonata form. So thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next one.